In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where 1,000 alien civilizations measure strength by the thunder of their war cries and the brutality of their conquests, humanity was dismissed as the silent weaklings. The Galactic Defense Academy had never seen a species so unremarkable. Human cadets were polite, followed orders, and kept to themselves. They didn't boast about their homeworld's victories or challenge others to duels of honor. They simply existed in the background, taking notes, studying quietly, and speaking only when spoken to. The other species, the towering Krathans with their bone-crushing strength, the lightning-fast Zephyrians with their razor-sharp reflexes, the cunning Vorthax with their tactical brilliance, all agreed on one thing: humans were destined to be the galaxy's eternal footnote, a species so unremarkable that even their military academy performance was adequate, never exceptional, never terrible, just quietly adequate. But sometimes, the quietest waters run the deepest, and sometimes, when the galaxy's most dangerous predators finally corner what they believe to be helpless prey, they discover that humanity's silence wasn't weakness. It was restraint. What happens when that restraint finally breaks? What happens when the galaxy's weakest species stops holding back? The answer would come from the most unlikely source imaginable: a small, unassuming human cadet whose combat footage would not just shock the world, but rewrite everything the galaxy thought it knew about the species called humanity. This is the story of Cadet Elena Vasquez, and the day the galaxy learned why humans fight so quietly, and why they should have been afraid of that silence all along. The morning alarm echoed through the dormitory halls of the Galactic Defense Academy with its usual harsh mechanical shriek. In the human quarters, the sound barely caused a ripple of movement. Elena Vasquez opened her eyes exactly 3 seconds before the alarm sounded, as she had every morning for the past 2 years. Her internal clock had become so precise that she could predict the Academy's schedule down to the minute. Around her, other human cadets stirred quietly from their beds, beginning their morning routines with the same methodical efficiency that had earned them the galaxy's collective eye roll. No war cries, no chest beating, no declarations of dominance, just the soft shuffle of feet on metal floors and the quiet rustle of uniforms being donned. Elena stood exactly 5 feet 4 inches tall, with dark hair that she kept regulation short and brown eyes that seemed to absorb everything while revealing nothing. She moved through her morning routine with mechanical precision. Shower, dress, weapons check, equipment inspection. Every motion was economical, purposeful, and utterly unremarkable to anyone watching. In the adjacent Krathan dormitory, the morning ritual was decidedly different. Massive 8-foot-tall warriors with gray, rock-like skin crashed into each other in ritualistic combat before breakfast, their bone-crushing blows echoing through the station. Their leader, Thrak the Bone Crusher, roared challenges that could be heard 3 sectors away. The Zephyrian quarters buzzed with supersonic movement as the insectoid warriors zipped through complex aerial maneuvers, their crystalline wings creating a musical humming that hurt human ears. Their speed trials often left scorch marks on the walls. Even the calculating Vorthax began each day with strategic debates that sounded more like intellectual warfare, their multiple eyes gleaming as they planned elaborate tactical scenarios designed to outwit their professors. And then there were the humans. Quiet, studious, unremarkable. Elena made her way to the main cafeteria, a massive hall that accommodated dozens of different atmospheric requirements and dietary needs. The space was divided into clear territorial zones, with each species claiming their traditional areas. The Krathans dominated the center with their massive tables carved from asteroid rock. The Zephyrians claimed the upper aerial platforms where they could hover while eating. The Vorthax occupied the strategically positioned corner tables with clear sightlines to all entrances. The humans sat near the back, at standard-issue tables, eating standard-issue rations, engaging in standard-issue conversation about homework and training schedules. Elena took her usual seat next to Marcus Chen, a fellow human cadet who specialized in engineering systems. Across from them sat Yuki Tanaka, their communications expert, and David Okoye, who was training in tactical analysis. They were all perfectly average students with perfectly average test scores and perfectly average combat simulation results. Another thrilling day of advanced xenological combat theory, Marcus muttered, picking at his protein cube. I can barely contain my excitement. At least Professor Goktar stopped using humans as the example of what not to do in combat, Yuki whispered back. Now we're just adequate for support roles. Elena listened to the conversation while scanning the cafeteria with the same quiet attention she brought to everything. Her eyes tracked movement patterns, noted the positioning of different species groups, and calculated optimal exit routes without conscious thought. It was a habit that had developed over months of being surrounded by beings who could literally tear her apart with their bare hands. At the Crathen table, she watched Thrak demonstrate a new bone-breaking technique on what appeared to be a piece of furniture. His massive claws left deep gouges in the metal, and his fellow warriors roared approval. The sound reverberated through the hall, causing several smaller species to flinch. The Zephyrians were engaged in what looked like a high-speed eating contest, their movements creating small sonic booms as they darted between different food stations. Their leader, Zakth the Swift, consumed an entire protein pack in less than 2 seconds. At the Vorthak table, strategist Vexhai was drawing complex battle formations in the air using holographic projectors built into his fingertips. His 6 eyes tracked multiple tactical scenarios simultaneously while 3 different conversations happened around him. Pathetic, came a booming voice from the Crathen section. Thrak had apparently finished his demonstration and was now surveying the cafeteria, his massive head turned toward the human section, and his lip curled in what might have been amusement or disgust. The soft skins grow quieter each day. Perhaps they are finally learning their place. A few Zephyrians buzzed in agreement, their high-pitched chittering adding to the general atmosphere of disdain. Even the Ganathians show more fighting spirit, one of them commented, referring to the slug-like species that were generally considered the galaxy's least threatening race. Elena felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with these moments. Not anger, she had learned long ago that anger was a luxury humans couldn't afford in this environment. It was more like a steady pressure, building somewhere behind her ribs, reminding her of all the things she wanted to say but couldn't. Just ignore them, David murmured, his voice barely audible. 2 more years and we're out of here. 2 more years of being the galaxy's punching bag, Marcus added bitterly. Elena took a careful bite of her protein cube and continued her observations. She noticed things that others missed. The way Thrak's right arm moved slightly slower than his left, suggesting an old injury that hadn't healed properly. The pattern in Zekth's movements that revealed his preferred attack angles. The fact that Vexhai's multiple conversation tracks meant he wasn't actually giving full attention to any single tactical analysis. She filed these observations away with thousands of others, a mental catalog that she maintained without really understanding why. It wasn't like she would ever need to use this information. Humans, as everyone constantly reminded them, were support personnel. Engineers, medics, communications specialists, the ones who kept the real warriors supplied and connected. The morning meal continued with its usual mix of casual intimidation and species-based social hierarchy. Elena finished her food and was preparing to leave when the cafeteria's main communication system activated. The holographic display that dominated the center of the hall flickered to life, showing the stern face of Admiral Korithvan, the Academy's Vorthak commandant. All cadets report to Combat Simulation Bay. 7 immediately. The Admiral's voice echoed through the hall. Full gear. This is not a drill. The reaction was immediate and telling. Crathen warriors leaped to their feet with roars of excitement, their massive forms already moving toward the exits. Zephyrians became blurs of motion, racing through the air toward the equipment bays. Vorthaks rose with calculated precision, their multiple eyes gleaming as they began tactical discussions. The humans stood up quietly and filed out with the same methodical efficiency they brought to everything else. Combat Simulation Bay. 7 was one of the Academy's largest training facilities, capable of generating entire battlefield environments using advanced holographic technology. As the cadets assembled, Elena could feel the electricity in the air. The other species were practically vibrating with anticipation. Admiral Korithvan stood at the center of the bay, his 6 eyes scanning the assembled cadets with the cold calculation that had made him one of the galaxy's most feared military strategists. His uniform bore the scars of a dozen campaigns, and his presence commanded immediate attention from even the most aggressive Crathen warriors. Today's exercise will be different, the Admiral began, his voice carrying easily through the vast space. Instead of species-segregated teams, you will be assigned to mixed units. The scenario is simple. Extract a high-value target from a hostile environment, While under heavy fire from superior forces, Elena felt a flutter of unease. Mixed species exercises were rare, mainly because they tended to result in injured human cadets when the larger, stronger species forgot about their smaller teammates' limitations. Team assignments are as follows, the Admiral continued, and Elena listened with growing dread as names were called. When her own name was announced, she found herself assigned to a unit with Thrak the Bone Crusher, Zizak the Swift, and Tactical Specialist, HFY. In other words, she was the token human in a team of the Academy's 3 most dangerous cadets. As the teams assembled, Elena could hear the snickering from other human cadets. They knew exactly what this was, another opportunity for the Academy to demonstrate human inadequacy in a combat situation. She would be the weak link, the liability that prevented her team from achieving optimal performance. Thrak loomed over her as she approached the team assembly point, his massive frame casting her into shadow. "So," he rumbled, his voice like grinding stone, "the soft skin is to be our burden today." Zizak buzzed in a circle around them, moving so fast that Elena could only track him by the slight displacement of air. "Perhaps she can carry our extra ammunition," he chittered, "if she can manage the weight." HFY was more diplomatic but no less dismissive. "I have calculated 17 different tactical approaches for this scenario," he said, his 6 eyes focusing on different holographic displays that seemed to materialize around him. "None of them require human-level capabilities, but I suppose we can find some support role for you." Elena nodded quietly and checked her equipment one final time. Standard human combat gear, lightweight armor designed for mobility rather than protection, a standard-issue plasma rifle calibrated for human strength and reflexes, and a basic medical kit. Everything about it screamed, support personnel. The simulation environment began to materialize around them. They were in an urban combat zone, with tall buildings providing cover and concealment, multiple levels for tactical movement, and a constant background noise of explosions and weapons fire. The target was located in a fortified position, approximately 2 kilometers away, defended by an unknown number of hostile forces. Combat simulation beginning in 30 seconds, the Academy's AI announced. Objectives: extract target designation Alpha alive, minimize team casualties. Bonus points for tactical efficiency. Thrak was already moving toward what appeared to be the most direct route, his massive claws extending as he prepared for the inevitable, close-quarters combat. Zizak buzzed upward, using his speed and aerial mobility to scout the higher levels. HFY immediately began calculating optimal approaches, his multiple eyes tracking several potential paths simultaneously. Elena found herself following behind, unnoticed and apparently unnecessary, which was exactly where she wanted to be. The first contact with enemy forces came within minutes. Simulated hostile troops appeared from concealed positions, their weapons tracking toward the team. Elena watched as her teammates reacted with the same predictable patterns she had observed in dozens of previous exercises. Thrak charged straight ahead, using his massive strength to smash through defensive barriers. His approach was devastatingly effective but also completely telegraphed. Every enemy in the simulation seemed to know exactly where he was going and when he would arrive. Zizak used his speed to create confusion, zipping between enemy positions faster than their targeting systems could track. But his high-speed approaches were limited to straight lines, and Elena could see the pattern that any experienced enemy would eventually exploit. HFY coordinated their movements with tactical precision, his multiple conversation tracks allowing him to direct both teammates simultaneously. But his tendency to overanalyze meant that he was always one step behind rapidly changing battlefield conditions. Elena moved through the simulation like a shadow, following routes that kept her out of direct confrontation, while maintaining visual contact with her teammates. She carried extra ammunition, provided covering fire when needed, and generally fulfilled exactly the role that everyone expected from a human cadet. But she was also watching, and learning, and remembering every single detail of how the simulation's defensive systems operated. When the team finally reached the target location, they found themselves pinned down by superior firepower. The extraction point was a heavily fortified bunker with multiple defensive layers and overlapping fields of fire. Thrak's direct approach had been stopped cold by concentrated plasma cannon fire. Zizak's speed was useless against area effect weapons that didn't need to target him precisely. and Vexhi's tactical calculations were struggling to account for the simulation's adaptive AI responses. "This is impossible," Thrak growled from behind cover, his armor scorched by near misses. "The defensive systems are too strong for a frontal assault." "I concur," Vexhi added, his eyes rapidly cycling through tactical options. "I cannot identify a viable approach vector that does not result in unacceptable casualty rates." Zakth buzzed in frustration. "Perhaps if the soft skin creates a distraction, we can—" "No." The word came out of Elena's mouth before she had consciously decided to speak. All three of her teammates turned to stare at her, surprised by the firm tone in her voice. "No," she repeated, more quietly this time. "That won't work either. Do you have a better idea, soft skin?" Thrak asked, his tone suggesting that he very much doubted she did. Elena looked at the fortified position ahead of them, then back at her teammates. For 2 years, she had been the quiet one, the adequate one, the support personnel who followed orders and didn't make waves. But she had also been the one who noticed everything, who remembered every pattern, who understood that sometimes the best way to win wasn't to be stronger or faster or smarter. Sometimes you just had to be willing to do what no one expected. "Yes," she said simply. "I do." And for the first time since arriving at the academy, Elena Vasquez stepped out of the shadows and into the light. Elena stepped forward, her small frame moving with a precision that her teammates had never noticed before. While they had been focused on their own spectacular combat techniques, she had been studying something entirely different. The simulation's weaknesses. "The defensive grid has a rotation cycle of 47 seconds, she said, her voice calm and measured. "Every 7th rotation, there's a 3-second gap in the lower left quadrant's coverage when the main cannon recalibrates its targeting matrix." Vexhi's 6 eyes focused on her with newfound attention. "I observed no such pattern in my tactical analysis." "Because you were calculating optimal attack vectors for your own capabilities," Elena replied, pulling out a small handheld device that most cadets used for basic communication. "You weren't looking for system flaws. You were looking for ways to overcome the system through superior force." She activated the device, and a detailed schematic of the defensive position appeared in holographic form. The projection showed firing patterns, energy signatures, and timing sequences that she had been quietly mapping since the exercise began. "Every defensive system has maintenance cycles," she continued, highlighting specific areas on the schematic. "The simulation's AI is sophisticated, but it's still running on predictable algorithms. It has to cycle through routine operations to maintain system stability." Thrak stared at the projection with growing confusion. "How did you gather this information while we were under fire?" "I was watching," Elena said simply. "While you were focused on fighting, I was focused on understanding." Zakth buzzed closer, his crystalline wings creating a low humming sound. "Even if such a gap exists, 3 seconds is insufficient for any meaningful assault." Elena nodded. "You're right. 3 seconds isn't enough time for a conventional assault, but it's enough time for something else." She manipulated the holographic display, showing the internal structure of the fortified bunker. Her analysis revealed power conduits, structural support points, and what appeared to be a secondary ventilation system that connected to the main defensive grid. "The simulation's designers made it realistic," she explained. "Real fortifications need life support systems, power distribution networks, and maintenance access points. They can't just be solid walls with guns." Vexhi's tactical mind immediately grasped the implications. "You intend to exploit infrastructure vulnerabilities, rather than engage the defensive systems directly." "Exactly." Elena highlighted a specific section of the bunker's lower level. "The power conduit for the main defensive grid runs through this maintenance tunnel. It's too small for any of you to access, but I can fit." "That's a suicide mission," Thrak rumbled. "Even if you could reach the power conduit, the tunnel system would be defended." "Actually, it won't be," Elena said, pulling up another section of her analysis. "Defensive AIs prioritize external threats. Internal infrastructure is protected by automated systems, not active combat units. The simulation's programmers assumed that no attacking force could access the internal systems." She paused, looking at each of her teammates in turn. "They never considered that someone might be small enough, quiet enough, and patient enough to find another way." The plan Elena outlined was unlike anything taught in the Academy's tactical courses. Instead of the direct assaults, speed attacks, or calculated strategic maneuvers that defined conventional military doctrine, she proposed something that required qualities her species had been mocked for: patience, subtlety, and the willingness to take on seemingly impossible tasks without glory or recognition. While her teammates created a distraction by launching coordinated attacks on the bunker's main defenses, Elena would use the 3-second gap to slip into the maintenance tunnel system. From there, she would navigate through the infrastructure to reach the power conduit and disable the entire defensive grid from within. The primary risk, HFY calculated aloud, is that you will be trapped inside the structure when the defensive systems detect the intrusion. The secondary risk, Zizak added, is that we cannot provide support if you encounter internal defenses. The tertiary risk, Thrak growled, is that this entire plan depends on the soft skin succeeding where our combined strength has failed. Elena checked her equipment one final time. She had removed most of her standard combat gear, keeping only what was essential for the infiltration mission. Her plasma rifle was replaced with a compact cutting tool for accessing sealed conduits. Her armor was stripped down to the minimum necessary for basic protection. "I understand the risks," she said quietly. "But this is what humans do. We find ways to solve problems that can't be solved through conventional means. We adapt, we improvise, we endure." The words carried a weight that surprised her teammates. For the first time, they were hearing something other than quiet compliance from their human squadmate. "Very well," HFY decided after a moment of calculation. "I will coordinate our distraction efforts to maximize the effectiveness of your infiltration window, and I will ensure that our assault draws every defensive system away from your insertion point," Thrak added, his massive claws flexing in anticipation. "I can create overlapping approach vectors that will confuse the targeting algorithms," Zizak contributed, his wings already beginning to vibrate in preparation for high-speed maneuvers. Elena felt an unexpected warmth at their acceptance of her plan. These were beings who had spent 2 years treating her as dead weight, and now they were trusting her with a mission that would determine their success or failure. The countdown to the next defensive rotation cycle began. Elena positioned herself at the optimal insertion point, a small maintenance hatch that was barely visible among the bunker's external infrastructure. Her teammates spread out to their assigned positions, ready to launch the most convincing attack they could manage. "Rotation cycle beginning," Elena announced softly into her communications device. "Gap window in 15 seconds. She could hear the intensity building in her teammates' preparations. Thrak was gathering himself for a massive charge that would draw every defensive cannon in his direction. Zizak was building up speed for a series of lightning-fast attack runs. HFY was coordinating their timing with mathematical precision. 5 seconds, Elena whispered. The defensive cannons began their recalibration sequence, their massive barrels shifting positions as the targeting systems updated their threat assessments. "Gap window. Now." Elena moved. In 2 years at the Academy, no one had ever seen a human move like Elena Vasquez moved in that moment. She didn't run toward the maintenance hatch, she flowed toward it, her body seeming to bend and compress in ways that shouldn't have been possible. Every motion was economical, purposeful, and utterly silent. She reached the hatch in 2.3 seconds, her compact cutting tool already active and slicing through the sealed access panel. By the time the defensive systems completed their recalibration, she had vanished into the bunker's maintenance infrastructure, as if she had never existed. The tunnel system was exactly as cramped and uncomfortable as she had expected. Elena found herself crawling through spaces barely wide enough for her shoulders, following power conduits and life support lines deeper into the bunker's core systems. The simulation's environmental controls made the tunnels hot, humid, and filled with the constant background noise of machinery. But Elena had grown up in the underground maintenance tunnels of Luna Colony, where space was at a premium and every cubic meter had to serve multiple functions. This environment wasn't hostile to her, it was familiar. She moved through the infrastructure like she belonged there, navigating by memory of the schematics she had memorized during the approach. Left at the primary power junction, down through the atmospheric recycling system, around the main data conduit cluster. The defensive systems never noticed her presence. Their sensors were calibrated to detect external threats, armed intruders, and tactical assault teams. They weren't programmed to recognize a small human crawling through maintenance spaces that were supposed to be inaccessible during combat operations. Elena reached the primary power distribution node after 23 minutes of careful navigation. The chamber was larger than the access tunnels, giving her room to work with her cutting tools and system interface equipment. Banks of power conduits lined the walls, each one carrying energy to different defensive systems throughout the bunker. But she didn't immediately begin cutting into the power grid. Instead, she spent several minutes studying the system's configuration, understanding how the components interacted, and identifying the most effective points of intervention. This was what humans did differently, she realized. Other species would have identified the power source and destroyed it, causing maximum damage as quickly as possible. But Elena understood that the goal wasn't destruction, it was achieving the mission objective with minimum necessary force. She traced the power flow to the specific conduits that fed the external defensive grid, leaving the life support systems and internal security measures intact. Her cutting tool made precise incisions that would disable the defensive cannons without causing a catastrophic system failure that might harm the target they were supposed to extract. Each cut was calculated to create a specific type of power failure, one that would appear to be a system malfunction rather than sabotage, buying her time to complete the mission before automated repair systems could compensate. Primary defensive grid power severed, she reported quietly into her communication device. Beginning secondary system isolation. Through the bunker's infrastructure, she could hear the sounds of her teammates' diversionary assault intensifying. Thrak's roars echoed through the structure as he drew defensive fire. Zakth's high-speed passes created sonic disturbances that rattled the walls. Vexhi's tactical coordination kept the simulation's AI focused on external threats. Elena worked methodically through each system, disabling only what was necessary to clear a path for her teammates' final assault. She left backup systems partially functional, communication networks operational, and environmental controls completely untouched. When she finally emerged from the maintenance tunnels, the bunker's defenses had been reduced to a fraction of their original effectiveness. But more importantly, they had been reduced in a way that confused the simulation's AI, creating gaps and blind spots that her teammates could exploit. All defensive systems compromised, she announced as she rejoined her team at the bunker's main entrance. You have a clear approach vector through the north corridor. Target extraction should be possible with minimal resistance. Her teammates stared at her with expressions she had never seen before. Not dismissal, not condescension. Something that might actually have been respect. How long were you in there? Thrak asked, his voice unusually subdued. 47 minutes, Elena replied, checking her equipment for damage. The internal layout was more complex than the schematics indicated, but the basic infrastructure followed standard military engineering protocols. 47 minutes, Zakth repeated, his chittering taking on a different tone. You were alone in there for 47 minutes, with no backup, no support, and no way to retreat if something went wrong. Elena considered this observation. Yes, but that's what the mission required. Vexhi's six eyes focused on her with newfound intensity. I have calculated the probability of success for your infiltration approach. Even with perfect knowledge of the defensive systems, the odds of completing such a mission without detection were approximately 12%. I know, Elena said simply, but 12% was better than 0%, which is what we had with conventional tactics. The target extraction proceeded exactly as Elena had predicted. With the defensive grid compromised and the AI confused by the systematic power failures, her teammates were able to reach the target location with minimal resistance. Thrak's strength was perfect for breaching the final defensive barriers. Zakth's speed allowed for rapid movement through the cleared corridors. Vexhi's tactical coordination ensured optimal efficiency in the extraction process. When the simulation ended with a perfect mission success rating, Elena found herself standing in front of her teammates in the main debriefing chamber, still covered in maintenance tunnel grime and looking like she had spent the better part of an hour crawling through mechanical systems, which, of course, she had. Combat simulation complete, the Academy's AI announced. Mission parameters achieved with exceptional tactical efficiency. Individual performance analysis will be available for review in 36 hours. As the other teams filed out of the simulation bay, many of them looking confused by the unusual mixed-species success, Elena began cleaning her equipment with the same methodical attention she brought to everything else. Soft skin, Thrak said, his voice unusually thoughtful. Elena, that was not what I expected. You fought like no one I've ever seen, Zizak added, his buzzing taking on what might have been an admiring tone. How did you learn to move like that? Elena paused in her equipment maintenance. I didn't learn to move like anything. I just moved like me. Vexhai stepped closer, his multiple eyes studying her with the intensity he usually reserved for complex tactical problems. You have been observing us, all of us. For how long? Since I arrived at the academy, Elena admitted. I needed to understand how everyone fought, how they thought, how they approached problems. It seemed like important information to have. And you never mentioned this because? Elena looked at the three beings who had just witnessed her disappear into a bunker's infrastructure and emerge with their mission objectives complete. For 2 years, she had been the quiet one, the unnoticed one, the support personnel who followed orders and didn't make waves. Because no one asked, she said quietly. And because I wasn't sure it mattered. As they left the simulation bay together, Elena realized that something fundamental had changed. Her teammates were talking to her differently, including her in their tactical discussions, asking for her input on approaches and strategies. For the first time since arriving at the academy, she felt like she might actually belong somewhere, but she had no idea that their simulation exercise had been recorded, analyzed, and flagged for review by the academy's senior tactical staff. She had no idea that her 47-minute solo infiltration mission had achieved efficiency ratings that defied conventional military theory. And she certainly had no idea that within hours, combat analysts across the galaxy would be watching footage of a small human cadet accomplishing what seasoned Special Forces operatives would have considered impossible. The quiet cadet was about to become considerably less quiet. Elena woke up the next morning to find her dormitory room filled with other cadets. Not just human cadets, representatives from every species in the academy were crowded around her bed, talking in excited whispers and gesturing at handheld data devices. She sat up slowly, her mind still processing the unusual sight. In 2 years at the academy, her room had never hosted more than her 3 human roommates. Now it looked like a diplomatic convention. What's going on? She asked, her voice still thick with sleep. Marcus Chen pushed through the crowd, his face bearing an expression of mixed excitement and bewilderment. Elena, you need to see this. Your combat simulation from yesterday, it's everywhere. He handed her a data tablet showing the Academy's internal communication network. The main feed was dominated by a single video file tagged with her cadet identification number. The view counter showed numbers that made her blink several times to ensure she was reading correctly. 47,000 views, she said, confusion evident in her voice. How is that possible? It was just a training exercise. Watch it, urged Yuki Tanaka from somewhere behind the crowd. You need to see what everyone else is seeing. Elena activated the video file and found herself watching her own infiltration mission from multiple camera angles. The simulation bay's recording systems had captured everything. Her initial analysis of the defensive grid, her methodical navigation through the maintenance tunnel system, and her precise dismantling of the bunker's power infrastructure. But watching it from external cameras revealed details she hadn't been aware of at the time. The way she moved through spaces that should have been impossible to navigate, the efficiency of her cutting tool techniques, which eliminated exactly the necessary components without wasting time on unnecessary destruction, the calm precision with which she worked while completely isolated from any possible backup or support. Pause it at the 23-minute mark, suggested Kethvor, a Krathan cadet Elena recognized but had never spoken to. His massive frame was squeezed uncomfortably into her small dormitory room, but his attention was entirely focused on the video. Elena paused the playback at the indicated timestamp. The image showed her working in the power distribution chamber, her small form surrounded by massive industrial conduits and control systems, but what stood out was the methodical way she approached each component, testing connections and tracing power flows before making any cuts. I've been studying this for 3 hours, Kethvor continued, his gravelly voice unusually subdued. My combat instructors have been analyzing human tactical doctrine, trying to understand how this level of infiltration capability could have gone unnoticed for so long. It's not just the infiltration, added Sylveth, a Zephyrian whose wings were creating a nervous humming sound. It's the patience. You spent more time studying the systems than actually disabling them. No one fights like that. No one thinks like that. Elena felt increasingly uncomfortable with the attention. She scrolled through the comments attached to the video file, finding responses in dozens of different languages from cadets representing species across the galaxy. The tone of the comments was unlike anything she had ever seen directed toward human capabilities. Impossible precision under pressure, one comment read. Human cadet demonstrates technical expertise that surpasses specialized infiltration operatives. Note the complete absence of wasted motion or unnecessary force. Read another. Every action serves a specific tactical purpose. How did Academy staff miss this level of capability during routine evaluations? Asked a third comment. This one tagged with an instructor-level access code. I don't understand, Elena said, looking up at the assembled crowd. This isn't unusual for humans. We solve problems by understanding them first, then finding the most efficient solution. It's just how we think. The room fell silent. Elena found herself under the focused attention of beings who had spent years dismissing her species as unremarkable support personnel. The intensity of their stare was making her distinctly uncomfortable. You're saying, Kethvor asked slowly, that other humans could perform similar infiltration missions? Well, yes, Elena replied, genuinely confused by the question. I mean, I'm not particularly exceptional. Marcus here is much better with technical systems than I am. Yuki could have analyzed the communication networks and disabled them more effectively. David's tactical analysis skills are significantly superior to mine. She gestured to her human roommates, who were looking increasingly stunned by the conversation. Any human with basic mechanical training and sufficient patience could have completed that mission. It just required understanding the systems well enough to work with them instead of against them. HFY materialized at the edge of the crowd, his 6 eyes focusing on Elena with the calculating intensity she had seen in the simulation bay. I have spent the night reviewing standard human training protocols and performance evaluations. According to Academy records, humans consistently score in the lowest percentiles for combat effectiveness, tactical innovation, and mission completion rates. Because you're testing us for the wrong things, Elena said, the words coming out before she realized she was speaking. The room's attention focused on her even more intensely, and she felt heat rising in her cheeks. Sorry, I didn't mean to. Continue, HFY said firmly. Explain. Elena looked around the room at faces that had never shown anything but dismissal or condescension toward her species. Now they were waiting for her to explain something that seemed obvious to her but apparently revolutionary to them. Your combat evaluations test for strength, speed, and aggressive tactical thinking, she began cautiously. Those are all important qualities, but they're not the only ways to achieve mission objectives. Humans excel at pattern recognition, problem-solving under resource constraints, and finding unconventional solutions to seemingly impossible challenges. She pulled up another section of the video, showing her initial analysis of the defensive grid. I spent 15 minutes just watching and taking notes before we even began the assault. Everyone else was focused on how to overcome the defenses through superior firepower or tactical superiority. I was trying to understand how the defenses worked, so I could find their weaknesses. But that approach requires accepting significant personal risk, Sylveth pointed out. Your infiltration mission had multiple failure points that could have resulted in mission failure or personal injury. Yes, Elena agreed. But the mission required someone to take those risks. And humans are very good at calculating acceptable risk levels for achieving necessary objectives. She paused, trying to find words for concepts that seemed self-evident to her. We don't fight because we're the strongest or the fastest or the most tactically brilliant. We fight because we understand that someone has to do the difficult jobs, and we're willing to be the ones who do them. Thrak's massive form pushed through the crowd, his bone-crushing claws carefully maneuvered to avoid damaging Elena's small dormitory room. Show them the power conduit sequence, he rumbled. The part where you disabled the grid without causing catastrophic system failure. Elena fast-forwarded to the relevant section and played the sequence where she systematically isolated the defensive grid's power supply while leaving all other systems functional. Watching it again, she could see why it might appear remarkable to observers who weren't familiar with human engineering principles. This level of precision, HFY noted, suggests extensive technical training and field experience. According to your academic records, you have neither. I grew up on Luna Colony, Elena explained. Everyone grows up learning basic engineering and maintenance skills because system failures can be fatal in a closed environmental system. You learn to fix problems with minimum disruption to other systems because you can't afford cascading failures. She manipulated the video controls to show different camera angles of her work in the power distribution chamber. This isn't advanced technical training. This is just knowing how to work with complex systems without breaking them. And other humans possess these capabilities? Asked a new voice from the back of the crowd. Elena couldn't identify the speaker, but the accent suggested one of the smaller insectoid species. All humans possess basic versions of these capabilities, Elena confirmed. Some are better than others, obviously, but the fundamental problem-solving approach is pretty universal in our species. The room erupted in quiet conversation as cadets began discussing this information in their native languages. Elena caught fragments of translation that suggested intense interest in human training methodologies and tactical doctrines. Why haven't you demonstrated these capabilities before? Kethvor asked, his question cutting through the background chatter. Elena considered the question carefully. It was a fair point. She had spent 2 years at the academy without ever displaying the skills that were now generating galaxy-wide attention. Because no one asked us to, she said finally. Every training exercise focused on conventional military tactics, direct assault, speed-based maneuvers, strategic coordination using superior firepower. Those approaches play to your species' natural strengths, not ours. She gestured to the video still showing on the data tablet. Yesterday's exercise was the first time I encountered a scenario where conventional tactics had failed and alternative approaches were necessary. So I used an alternative approach. You mean, Sylveth said slowly. Human combat doctrine is specifically designed for situations where conventional tactics have proven inadequate. The question hung in the air like an unexploded bomb. Elena realized that she had just suggested something that contradicted fundamental assumptions about military hierarchy and species-based capabilities. I don't think I would call it combat doctrine exactly, she said carefully. It's more like problem-solving methodology. We approach challenges by trying to understand them thoroughly, then finding solutions that work with available resources and constraints, even if those solutions require accepting significant personal risk and operating without support. Vexhai pressed. Especially then, Elena replied. Those are usually the problems that most need solving. The conversation was interrupted by the dormitory's communication system announcing an academy-wide assembly in 30 minutes. As the crowd began to disperse, Elena noticed that several cadets lingered to ask specific technical questions about her infiltration techniques. Kethvor was particularly interested in her navigation methodology. How did you maintain spatial orientation in the maintenance tunnel system without standard navigation aids? Luna colony maintenance tunnels don't have navigation aids, Elena explained. You learn to track your position by counting turns, timing your movement, and remembering key landmarks. It becomes automatic after a while. Sylveth wanted to know about her risk assessment calculations. How did you determine that the 12% success probability was acceptable? Because 12% was infinitely better than 0%, Elena replied. And because someone had to try something different if we wanted to complete the mission. As her dormitory room finally emptied, Elena found herself alone with her human roommates, who were all staring at her with expressions she couldn't quite interpret. Elena, Marcus said slowly, do you realize what just happened here? Not really, she admitted. Everyone seems very interested in a basic infiltration mission that any maintenance worker could have completed. Any human maintenance worker, Yuki corrected. But according to everyone else in the galaxy, no other species produces individuals capable of that level of independent problem-solving under extreme pressure. David was scrolling through his own data device, reading comments and analysis from across the Academy's networks. They're calling it revolutionary tactical thinking. There are senior instructors requesting permission to study the video for inclusion in advanced tactical courses. Elena felt a growing sense of unease. It was just one training exercise. It doesn't mean anything significant, doesn't it? Marcus asked. Elena, for 2 years we've been told that humans are support personnel. We're not strong enough for frontline combat, not fast enough for assault operations, not tactically sophisticated enough for command positions. We've accepted that our role is to maintain equipment and provide technical support for the real warriors. He gestured toward his data device, which was showing the view counter for Elena's video. The number had increased to over 60,000 views while they were talking. But what if we've been thinking about this all wrong? He continued. What if human capabilities aren't inferior to other species' abilities? What if they're just different? What if we've been trying to fit into military roles designed for completely different types of thinking? Elena considered this possibility while preparing for the mandatory assembly. For 2 years, she had accepted the Academy's assessment of human capabilities as accurate. Humans were weaker than Krathens, slower than Zephyrians, less tactically sophisticated than Vorthax. These facts were demonstrable and undeniable, but strength, speed, and conventional tactical thinking weren't the only relevant factors in military effectiveness. Yesterday's exercise had proven that other qualities could be equally valuable. Patience, adaptability, willingness to accept risk, and the ability to find solutions that no one else had considered. As she walked toward the assembly hall with thousands of other cadets, Elena realized that everything was about to change. Not just for her, but potentially for every human in the galaxy. The quiet species was about to become considerably less quiet, and the galaxy was about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous warriors are the ones who fight so quietly that no one notices them until it's too late. The main assembly hall buzzed with an energy Elena had never felt before. Thousands of cadets from dozens of species filled the massive amphitheater. But instead of the usual species-based clustering, the seating arrangement seemed almost random. Krathens sat next to humans. Zephyrians hovered near Vorthac tactical groups, and everyone seemed to be engaged in intense discussions about the video that had dominated the Academy's communication networks overnight. Elena took her usual seat in the human section, but found herself surrounded by cadets from other species who had specifically sought out positions nearby. The attention was making her increasingly uncomfortable, especially when she noticed several instructors in the observation galleries pointing in her direction. Admiral Karith Van took the central platform, his 6 eyes scanning the assembled cadets with obvious satisfaction. The Vorthac commander's presence immediately commanded attention, and the hall fell into expectant silence. Yesterday's mixed-species training exercise has yielded some interesting results. The Admiral began, his voice carrying easily through the vast space. Performance analysis has revealed tactical innovations that warrant further investigation and potential integration into our standard curriculum. Elena felt her stomach tighten with apprehension. She had hoped that yesterday's success would be noted and forgotten, allowing her to return to the comfortable anonymity she had maintained for 2 years. Cadet Elena Vasquez, the Admiral continued, and Elena's heart stopped completely. Please report to the central platform. The walk to the platform felt like the longest journey of Elena's life. Thousands of eyes tracked her movement as she made her way down the aisle, her small form dwarfed by the massive assembly hall. The whispered conversations that followed her progress were in dozens of different languages, but she could sense the excitement and curiosity in every voice. When she reached the platform, Admiral Karith Van studied her with an intensity that made her feel like a specimen under examination. His 6 eyes seemed to be cataloging every detail of her appearance and demeanor. Cadet Vasquez, he said, his voice now amplified throughout the hall. Your performance in yesterday's exercise has generated significant interest among our tactical analysis staff. Would you be willing to demonstrate some of your infiltration techniques for the assembled cadets? Elena's mind raced through possible responses, none of them seeming adequate for the situation. Sir, I'm not certain that my techniques are sufficiently advanced to warrant demonstration. The infiltration was simply a matter of understanding the available systems and working within their constraints. A rumble of laughter came from the Krathen section, but it wasn't the mocking laughter Elena had grown accustomed to. It sounded almost appreciative. Understanding available systems and working within their constraints, the Admiral repeated, his tone suggesting that he found this description particularly interesting. Would you elaborate on that approach? Elena realized that she was trapped. Refusing to explain would be insubordination. But explaining would mean revealing human tactical thinking to an audience that might use that information in ways she couldn't predict. Sir, most military doctrine focuses on overcoming obstacles through the application of superior force or tactical advantage. She began carefully. Human problem-solving methodology tends to emphasize understanding obstacles thoroughly enough to find ways around them rather than through them. And this approach requires the operator to accept significant personal risk while working without backup or support, the Admiral observed. Yes, sir. But someone has to be willing to take those risks if the mission objectives are to be achieved through unconventional means. Admiral Korathvan activated a holographic display system that showed Elena's infiltration video from multiple angles. The massive screen surrounding the assembly hall allowed every cadet to see the details of her navigation through the maintenance tunnel system and her precise work in the power distribution chamber. Note the complete absence of hesitation or uncertainty, the Admiral pointed out, highlighting specific sequences where Elena had made critical decisions without consultation or confirmation. This level of autonomous decision-making under pressure is typically associated with senior special operations personnel, not academy cadets. Elena watched herself on the screens with growing discomfort. Seeing her actions from external perspectives made them appear more dramatic and significant than they had felt at the time. "Sir, autonomous decision-making is a standard human survival trait," she said. "Our environmental conditions and technological dependencies require individuals to solve problems independently when communication or consultation isn't possible. You're suggesting that all humans possess these capabilities?" The question hung in the air, and Elena realized that her answer would have implications far beyond her own situation. She looked out at the assembled cadets, seeing species representatives who had spent years dismissing human capabilities, now watching her with intense attention. "Sir, I'm suggesting that humans approach problem-solving differently than most other species. We tend to focus on adaptation and persistence rather than immediate dominance." Admiral Korathvan manipulated the holographic display to show Elena's power conduit work in detail. This level of technical precision suggests extensive specialized training. "According to your records, you have no formal engineering credentials." "No, sir, but Luna colony life requires basic technical competency from all residents. System maintenance is a survival skill, not a specialized profession. And other human colonies develop similar skill sets in their populations?" Elena felt the weight of thousands of eyes watching her response. "Yes, sir. Human colonies generally develop self-reliance skills appropriate to their environmental challenges. We learn to solve problems with available resources rather than waiting for specialized assistance." The Admiral's 6 eyes focused on her with increasing intensity. "Cadet Vasquez, are you aware that your infiltration mission achieved efficiency ratings that exceed performance standards for special operations personnel from every species in the Galactic Defense Force?" The assembly hall erupted in excited conversations as this information registered with the assembled cadets. Elena felt heat rising in her cheeks as she realized the magnitude of what had apparently happened during what she considered a routine training exercise. "No, sir. I was not aware of that comparison. Would you be willing to participate in additional exercises designed to evaluate human tactical capabilities under various combat scenarios?" Elena's mind raced through the implications of this request. Additional exercises meant continued attention, analysis, and scrutiny of human methods. But it also meant the possibility of demonstrating that her species was capable of more than support roles. "Sir, I would be honored to participate in any exercises that might benefit the Academy's training programs." "Excellent." Admiral Korathvan turned to address the entire assembly. "Beginning tomorrow, we will be conducting a series of specialized training exercises designed to evaluate alternative tactical approaches. These exercises will focus on scenarios where conventional military doctrine has proven inadequate and will emphasize problem-solving methodologies that prioritize adaptation over force." He paused, allowing this information to register with the assembled cadets. "Participation will be voluntary, but I encourage representatives from all species to observe and learn from these demonstrations. Military effectiveness is not limited to traditional approaches, and the Galactic Defense Force must be prepared to adapt our methods to incorporate innovative thinking from all member species." As Elena returned to her seat, she found herself surrounded by cadets asking detailed questions about human training, methodologies, and problem-solving approaches. The questions came so rapidly that she could barely process them, let alone provide adequate responses. "How do you maintain calm under extreme pressure?" asked a Vorthak cadet whose tactical analysis specialization made him particularly interested in Elena's decision-making process. "Do all humans possess such spatial reasoning capabilities?" inquired a crystalline-bodied silicate, whose species was known for mathematical precision. "What other human colonies have produced individuals with similar skill sets?" pressed a fur-covered Ursoid, whose people were renowned for their strategic planning abilities. Elena found herself attempting to explain concepts that seemed obvious to her but apparently revolutionary to others. Human patience wasn't a tactical advantage, it was simply practical. Human willingness to accept risk wasn't heroic, it was necessary. Human problem-solving skills weren't exceptional, they were adaptive responses to challenging environmental conditions. But as she listened to herself explain these concepts, she began to understand why they seemed significant to other species. Most galactic civilizations had developed military doctrines based on leveraging their natural physical or intellectual advantages. Krathans used strength, Zephyrians used speed, Vorthax used tactical brilliance. Humans, lacking obvious physical or intellectual superiority, had developed military approaches based on different qualities entirely: persistence, adaptability, and the willingness to find solutions that others considered impossible or too risky to attempt. The key difference, she found herself explaining to a mixed group of fascinated cadets, is that humans don't fight to win quickly. We fight to keep fighting until we find a way to win eventually. This observation seemed to resonate particularly strongly with the assembled listeners. Several cadets began taking notes, and Elena noticed that some of the instructors in the observation galleries were recording the conversation for later analysis. But this approach requires accepting casualties and setbacks that other species would consider unacceptable, pointed out Kethvor, who had become increasingly vocal in his interest in human tactical thinking. Not necessarily, Elena replied. It requires accepting that perfect solutions are rare, and that acceptable solutions often involve risks that others aren't willing to take. Someone has to be willing to try the approaches that conventional wisdom says won't work. And humans are willing to be that someone? Asked Sylveth. Elena considered this question carefully. It seemed to go to the heart of what made her species different from others in the galactic community. I think humans understand that sometimes the choice isn't between a safe solution and a risky solution, she said slowly. Sometimes the choice is between a risky solution and no solution at all. When you're facing those kinds of choices, taking the risk becomes the reasonable option. As the assembly dispersed, Elena found herself walking back to her dormitory with a growing sense that everything had changed irreversibly. The quiet human cadet was no longer quiet, and the galaxy was beginning to pay attention to her species in ways that could have far-reaching consequences. But she had no idea that her words were already being transmitted across galactic communication networks, analyzed by military strategists from dozens of different civilizations, and incorporated into tactical discussions that would reshape how the galaxy thought about warfare itself. The quiet species had finally spoken, and the galaxy was listening very carefully indeed. 6 months later, Elena stood in the same assembly hall that had witnessed her first public demonstration, but everything else had changed beyond recognition. The Academy's entire training curriculum had been restructured around what military analysts now called human adaptive tactical integration. And cadets from across the galaxy were learning problem-solving, methodologies that emphasize persistence and unconventional thinking. But more significantly, the galactic military hierarchy had been fundamentally altered by the revelation that an entire species had been systematically underutilized due to flawed evaluation criteria. The transformation had begun slowly, with additional training exercises designed to test human capabilities under various combat scenarios. Elena had participated in dozens of simulations, each one revealing new aspects of human tactical thinking that challenged conventional military doctrine. In urban warfare simulations, humans had demonstrated an uncanny ability to turn environmental obstacles into tactical advantages. While other species focused on overcoming or destroying barriers, humans found ways to work with existing infrastructure to create strategic positions and resource advantages. In resource-constrained scenarios, human cadets consistently outperformed their galactic counterparts by finding creative solutions to problems that others considered unsolvable. Where Krathans demanded better equipment and Zephyrians required faster transportation, humans simply adapted their approaches to work with whatever was available. In long-duration endurance tests, humans had revealed psychological resilience that allowed them to maintain effectiveness under conditions that caused other species to suffer significant performance degradation. But the real breakthrough had come during a classified simulation that recreated an actual military disaster from the galaxy's recent history. The failed assault on the Drex Nebula fortifications. The scenario had been considered impossible to resolve through conventional means, making it an ideal test case for alternative approaches. Elena and a team of human cadets had been given the same initial conditions that had led to the original military failure: insufficient firepower, inadequate intelligence, hostile environmental conditions, and enemy forces with significant tactical advantages. Instead of attempting to overcome these disadvantages through superior force or brilliant strategy, the human team had accepted the constraints as given parameters and worked within them to find alternative objectives that could still achieve the broader mission goals. Rather than attacking the fortifications directly, they had identified supply chain vulnerabilities that could be exploited through patient observation and minimal footprint operations. Instead of engaging enemy forces in open combat, they had found ways to turn the hostile environment into a weapon that affected the enemy more severely than themselves. The simulation had concluded with complete mission success achieved through methods that no galactic military strategist had considered viable. The results had sent shockwaves through the Galactic Defense Command. Military analysts began examining human colonies, studying human history, and interviewing human personnel who had been relegated to support roles for decades. What they discovered revolutionized galactic understanding of military effectiveness. Humans, it turned out, had been fighting wars using completely different principles than every other known species. While galactic military doctrine emphasized decisive victory through superior capabilities, human military thinking focused on sustainable attrition that gradually shifted conflict conditions in their favor. Human soldiers didn't need to be stronger, faster, or more tactically brilliant than their enemies. They needed to be more persistent, more adaptable, and more willing to continue fighting under conditions that would cause other species to surrender or retreat. Admiral Korithvan had summarized the revelation in a report that became required reading throughout the Galactic Defense Force. Humanity represents the first species we have encountered that has developed military doctrine specifically designed for winning wars rather than winning battles. Their tactical approaches assume extended conflict duration and emphasize sustainable effectiveness over immediate dominance. The implications had been staggering. Military strategists began reconsidering conflicts that had been labeled as unsolvable, wondering if human tactical approaches might offer solutions that conventional thinking had missed. Recruitment policies were revised to actively seek human personnel for roles that required unconventional problem-solving. Training programs were restructured to include human-developed methodologies alongside traditional tactical approaches, and Elena found herself at the center of it all, serving as both an example of human capabilities and a bridge between human thinking and galactic military culture. Standing on the assembly platform where her journey had begun, she looked out at an audience that bore little resemblance to the dismissive crowd that had originally watched her demonstration. Cadets from every species hung on her words with intense attention, taking detailed notes and asking sophisticated questions about human tactical philosophy. The fundamental principle, she explained to the assembled listeners, is that humans don't fight to win immediately. We fight to create conditions where winning eventually becomes inevitable. She activated the holographic display to show a strategic analysis of the Drex Nebula simulation. Other species approached this scenario by calculating how to overcome the enemy's advantages. We approached it by asking what the enemy needed to maintain those advantages and how we could systematically eliminate those requirements. A Krathan cadet raised one massive claw. But this approach requires accepting extended casualty rates and resource expenditures that most command structures would consider unacceptable. Mutt, only if you're measuring success by quarterly metrics, Elena replied. Human strategic thinking operates on longer timescales. We're willing to accept short-term costs for long-term advantages. A Zephyrian's crystalline wings hummed with curiosity. How does your species maintain morale and unit cohesion during extended conflicts with uncertain outcomes? Elena considered this question carefully. It went to the heart of what made human military psychology unique in the galactic community. We tell ourselves stories, she said simply. Humans are exceptionally good at creating narratives that give meaning to sacrifice and persistence. We convince ourselves that our struggles serve purposes larger than immediate tactical objectives. She paused, seeing the fascination in her listeners' faces. Other species fight for territory, resources, or dominance. Humans fight for ideas, and ideas are much harder to defeat than armies. Admiral Korithvan stepped forward, his 6 eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Cadet Vasquez has been accepted for advanced tactical training at the Galactic Strategic Command Institute, he announced. She will be the first human to attend the Institute's Senior Strategic Planning Program. The announcement generated excited discussion throughout the assembly. The Strategic Command Institute represented the pinnacle of galactic military education, training the officers who would lead major campaigns and shape defense policy for entire sectors. But Elena felt a familiar tightness in her chest as she realized that her quiet anonymity was disappearing forever. She would be representing her entire species at the galaxy's most prestigious military academy, carrying the responsibility of proving that humans deserved recognition as equal partners in galactic defense. As the assembly concluded, she found herself surrounded by the same cadets who had once dismissed her as inadequate support personnel, but their questions now reflected genuine respect for human capabilities and curiosity about human methods. Thrak, whose initial dismissal had started her journey toward recognition, approached with an expression that might have been admiration. "Human," he said, his gravelly voice unusually subdued. "I owe you an apology. I spent 2 years believing that your species was weak because you didn't fight like Krathens. You weren't wrong about us being different," Elena replied. "You were just wrong about different meaning, inferior." "Indeed." Thrak's massive claws gestured toward the departing crowd of cadets. "My people's military academies are now incorporating human tactical methodologies into their core curricula. Children who will never meet a human are learning to think like humans when conventional approaches fail." Vexhai joined their conversation, his multiple eyes tracking several data streams simultaneously. "I have been analyzing the broader implications of human military integration," he said. "Conservative estimates suggest that galactic defense effectiveness could improve by 30 to 40% through optimal deployment of human strategic thinking. And more importantly," added Zakth, buzzing nearby, "we're learning to recognize that military strength isn't just about individual capabilities. It's about how different types of capabilities work together to create emergent advantages." Elena nodded, understanding that they had all learned something fundamental about cooperation and mutual respect. The galaxy's military might wasn't diminished by acknowledging human contributions, it was enhanced by incorporating human approaches alongside existing tactical doctrines. As she walked back to her dormitory for the last time, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought her from quiet support personnel to galactic recognition. She had never intended to challenge existing military hierarchies or prove anything about human capabilities. She had simply tried to solve problems using the methods that seemed most appropriate to the situation. But sometimes the most profound changes come from the smallest actions. Sometimes the most powerful demonstrations are the ones that appear effortless, and sometimes the quietest voices carry the most important messages. The galaxy had spent centuries assuming that military effectiveness required dramatic displays of strength, speed, or tactical brilliance. But Elena's quiet competence had proven that sometimes the most dangerous warriors are the ones who solve problems so efficiently that their enemies never realize they're under attack until it's too late. In her small dormitory room, she found a message waiting on her personal communication device. It was from David Okoye, the human cadet whose tactical analysis skills she had once considered superior to her own. He was writing from the Luna Colony Defense Force, where he had been assigned as a strategic planning officer, a position that hadn't existed for humans until 6 months ago. "Elena," the message read, "you probably don't realize this, but you've changed everything. Not just for us, but for everyone. The galaxy is finally learning that there are many different ways to be strong, and that the quiet ones are often the most dangerous ones of all. Thank you for showing them what humans can do when someone finally asks us to." Elena smiled as she prepared for the next phase of her journey. Tomorrow, she would leave the academy for the Strategic Command Institute, where she would continue representing her species in the highest levels of galactic military planning. But tonight, she was still the quiet cadet who had once crawled through maintenance tunnels because someone needed to find a different way to solve an impossible problem. Some things, she realized, would never change, and some things should never change. The galaxy had finally learned to listen to the quiet ones, and Elena Vasquez, the quiet cadet who had shocked the world with her combat footage, had taught them that sometimes the most powerful voice is the one that speaks only when it has something important to say. The revolution had begun with a whisper, but it would reshape the galaxy with the force of thunder.